At my son's funeral, standing right over his casket, while the rain poured down, my daughter-in-law Brittany leaned over to a man I had never seen before and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "I am not taking care of that old witch. Tomorrow morning I am driving her to the state nursing home and dumping her there." She thought the rain drowned out her voice. She thought I was just a grieving, helpless 68-year-old widow who had lost her only child. She had no idea that 3 days before his massive heart attack, my son David had transferred every single asset, the house, the stocks, and the savings, into a living trust with me as the sole trustee. She thought she was inheriting a kingdom, but she was about to inherit a war. Before I tell you how I legally destroyed her life and kicked her out of my house with nothing but the clothes on her back, please leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family member who underestimated you. My name is Esther Williams, and I have lived in this historic brownstone neighborhood for 40 years. I worked double shifts as a head nurse to buy our home, to send David to college, and to build a legacy that was supposed to last for generations. Standing in that cemetery, the mud sticking to my sensible black heels, I looked at my son's wife. Brittany was 35 years old and wearing a red dress that was too tight and entirely inappropriate for a funeral. She was scrolling through her phone while the pastor spoke about David's kindness. Next to her stood a man named Chad. She had introduced him as a colleague from David's firm. But colleagues do not stand that close, and they certainly do not hold hands when they think no one is looking. I stood straight, my back stiff, refusing to let a single tear fall in front of her. I would cry for my son later in the dark when I was alone. Right now, I had to be a soldier. The pastor finished his prayer, and as the first shovel of dirt hit the wood of the casket, Brittany let out a loud, theatrical sob. It was a performance worthy of an award. She threw herself onto Chad's shoulder, wailing about how she was all alone in the world now. I watched her through my black veil. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was setting the stage. She was playing the grieving, fragile widow, so that when she sold my house and threw me out, everyone would think she had no choice. I gripped my cane, not because I needed it to walk, but because I needed to hold on to something to keep from striking her. The service ended, and the crowd began to disperse toward the cars. Brittany turned to me, her face instantly dry, her eyes cold and hard like marbles. "Esther," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Chad is going to drive us back to the house for the repast. You can ride in the back. Try not to get mud on the leather seats." The drive back to the brownstone was silent. I sat in the back seat of my son's luxury sedan, a car I knew he had bought to please her, and watched the back of her head. She was texting furiously. I could see the reflection of her screen in the side window. I saw the words "sell" and "immediately." My heart broke all over again, not for the house, but for David. He had worked himself into an early grave, trying to keep up with her demands, and before his body was even cold, she was liquidating his life. We pulled up to the house. It was a beautiful 4-story structure with stone steps and intricate ironwork, a jewel in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. Developers had been circling our block for years, offering cash, trying to push the original families out. I had always said no. I intended to leave this house to David and then to my granddaughter Zoe. But as we walked up the steps, I saw the hungry look in Brittany's eyes as she surveyed the property. She didn't see a home. She saw a lottery ticket. Inside the house was already full. The women from my church, the sisters from Mount Zion, had arrived early to set up the repast. The air was thick with the smell of comfort. Fried chicken collard greens, simmered with smoked turkey mac and cheese, baked with 3 kinds of cheddar cornbread and sweet potato pie. It was the smell of love, of community, of a proper home-going celebration. Sister Patterson. My oldest friend came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on an apron, "We fixed everything up nice, Esther," she said, hugging me. "We made David's favorites." Before I could thank her, Brittany stormed into the hallway. She stopped dead, wrinkling her nose as if she smelled sewage. "What is that smell?" she shrieked. Her voice cut through the quiet murmurs of the guests. Sister Patterson stepped back, looking confused. "It is the food, baby. We brought dinner for the family." Brittany marched into the dining room and looked at the spread on the antique mahogany table. "This is disgusting," she spat. "It smells like grease and poverty. I am not having my husband's memorial turned into a ghetto picnic. Get this trash out of my house." The room went deadly silent. These women had known David since he was a baby. They had changed his diapers, taught him Sunday school, and prayed over him. Sister Patterson looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. Brittany grabbed a tray of cornbread and shoved it toward the edge of the table. It tipped, crashing onto the floor, crumbling into the expensive Persian rug. I stepped forward, my hand tightening on my cane. "Brittany," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "you will show respect. These women are guests." Brittany whirled around, her face twisted in a sneer. "Respect," she laughed. "I am the owner of this house now, Esther. I decide what we eat. And we are not eating this heart attack on a plate. Chad, call the Italian catering place downtown. Tell them to send over the platinum package. Put it on David's credit card." She looked at the church mothers with pure disdain. "You people can take your Tupperware and go. Or you can stay, but this food goes in the garbage." I watched as Chad pulled out his phone, smirking. He pulled out David's wallet. My son's wallet, which he had taken from the hospital, and slid out the black credit card. I felt a burning heat rise in my chest, a rage so pure it almost blinded me. But I remembered what my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, had told me. "Let her dig her own grave, Esther. Let her show everyone exactly who she is. We need witnesses." So I swallowed my anger. It tasted like bile. I nodded to Sister Patterson. "It is okay," I whispered. "Please just leave it. I will clean it up later." The women looked at me with pity, but they set the rest of the food down gently and retreated to the living room. They whispered among themselves, casting angry glances at Brittany. They were witnesses now. They saw her cruelty. An hour later, the Italian catering arrived. Tiny portions of pasta and dry bruschetta that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. Brittany was in her element, holding a glass of wine, holding court in the center of the living room. She had invited people I didn't know, real estate agents, developers, people who had never met David. It wasn't a funeral repast. It was a networking event. I sat in the corner in my high-backed armchair, watching. Zoe, my 19-year-old granddaughter, sat on the ottoman at my feet. She was wearing a black dress that Brittany had criticized for being too frumpy. Zoe had been crying for 3 days straight. She was a quiet girl, studying forensic accounting at the university, brilliant but shy. She hated conflict, but she gripped my hand so hard her knuckles were white. Grandma Zoe whispered, "Why is she doing this? Why is that man Chad wearing Dad's watch?" I looked at Chad's wrist. It was true. He was wearing David's vintage Rolex, a watch I had given my son when he graduated from college. Brittany must have given it to him immediately. "Silence, child," I said softly. "Watch and listen. We are gathering ammunition." Suddenly, Brittany clapped her hands to get the room's attention. She stepped up onto a sturdy oak chair, her heels digging into the wood. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" she called out. The room quieted. She put on a sad face, tilting her head. "I just want to thank you all for coming to support me during this tragedy. Losing David is the hardest thing I have ever gone through." But she paused for dramatic effect, dabbing a dry eye. "But the hardest part is knowing that I now have a heavy burden to carry alone." She pointed a manicured finger at me. My poor mother-in-law Esther. The grief has been too much for her. As you can see, she is just sitting there staring into space. The doctor says it is early onset dementia triggered by the shock. She is confused. She doesn't know where she is half the time. A ripple of murmurs went through the room. I stiffened. Dementia. So that was her play. She was going to paint me as incompetent to seize control of the estate before the will was even read. Brittany continued, her voice trembling with fake sympathy. It breaks my heart. But I have to be strong. I have decided to step up as her legal guardian. I will be managing the assets and the property to ensure she gets the care she needs. It is what David would have wanted. She looked around the room, soaking in the sympathetic nods from the strangers she had invited. I am going to make sure she is placed in a facility where professionals can handle her outbursts. It is a sacrifice, but I am willing to make it. Zoe started to stand up. Her face flushed with anger. That is a lie, she hissed. Grandma is sharper than you are. I pulled Zoe back down. I squeezed her hand until she looked at me. I shook my head imperceptibly. Not yet. Let her talk. Let her say it in front of everyone. Brittany looked down at us and smiled a cold, predatory smile. See, she said to the crowd. Poor Zoe is in denial. It is so hard for the young ones to accept reality. But do not worry. I am in charge now. I sat there stoic, my face a mask of stone. I let the whispers wash over me. Look at her, they were saying. She does look out of it. Brittany is so brave to take that on. I memorized every face that nodded. I memorized every lie she told. The party dragged on for hours. Brittany drank 3 glasses of wine and laughed loudly with the real estate developer, a man named Mr. Sterling, who was eyeing my crown moldings like he wanted to tear them down. I heard them discussing numbers. 2 million for the lot, he said. I can have the demolition crew here by next week. Brittany giggled. Just get the check ready, she said. As soon as I drop the old bag off at the nursing home tomorrow, the house is yours. I felt a physical pain in my chest, the house where I had bathed David in the sink, where I had nursed my husband through cancer, where Zoe had taken her first steps. She was selling it for scrap to pay for her gambling debts and her boyfriend. Finally, the last guest left. The house was quiet, filled with the smell of stale wine and betrayal. I stood up, my joints aching, and walked toward the stairs. I needed to rest. I needed to call Mr. Henderson. I reached the landing and turned toward the master bedroom, the large suite at the front of the house with the bay windows. It had been my room for 40 years until David moved in to help me, and I had insisted he and Brittany take it while I moved to the smaller guest room down the hall. But tonight, I just wanted to sit in my old chair by the window and pray. I reached for the handle of the master bedroom door. It was locked. I jiggled the handle. Nothing. From the other side, I heard Brittany's voice. Do not bother Esther. She didn't even open the door. Go sleep downstairs on the sofa. This is the master suite. It belongs to the master of the house. That is me now. I heard Chad laugh inside the room. I heard the clinking of glasses. They were in there in the room where I had slept with my husband, drinking my wine, celebrating my demise. Zoe came up behind me on the stairs, her eyes wide and fearful. Grandma, she whispered, what are we going to do? She locked us out. I looked at the closed door. I looked at the scratches on the wood where Brittany had forced the lock. I turned to my granddaughter. She expects me to cry, Zoe. She expects me to beg. She thinks I am a weak old woman who has nowhere to go. I straightened my spine, feeling the steel that had carried me through 68 years of hardship, through segregation, through loss, through double shifts and hard labor. Go to your room, Zoe, I said calmly. Pack your computer. Pack your important papers. Tonight we sleep. But tomorrow the devil finds out that he knocked on the wrong door. I walked back down the stairs, my cane tapping a rhythm on the hardwood. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown. I lay on the uncomfortable floral sofa in the living room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house settling. Upstairs, the floorboards creaked as Brittany and Chad moved around. I heard the sound of glass breaking. I heard them tearing things. They were looking for the safe. They were looking for the papers. They wouldn't find them. David had moved them to the bank deposit box 3 weeks ago when he found out about her debts. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I rehearsed the plan in my mind. Phase 1 was silence. Phase 2 was surveillance. Phase 3 was total destruction. Brittany wanted a war. She was going to get a nuclear winter. As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows across the living room floor, I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. It wasn't Brittany, it was Chad. He was wearing David's silk robe, the one I had bought him for Christmas. He walked into the kitchen, scratched his stomach, and drank milk straight from the carton. He looked at me lying on the sofa and smirked. "Morning, Granny," he said. "You better get up. Movers are coming at 8 to clear out all this junk." He kicked the leg of my antique coffee table. "Brittany wants everything modern. White leather, glass. None of this dusty history crap." I sat up slowly, folding my blanket with precise movements. "You are making a mistake, son," I said, my voice raspy from lack of sleep. "This is not your house." Chad laughed, wiping milk from his chin. "It is Brittany's house, and what is hers is mine. We are getting married, Granny, as soon as the check for this place clears, so you can take your voodoo threats somewhere else." He turned his back on me. I pulled my phone from my pocket under the blanket. I had a text message from Mr. Henderson. It was just 3 words. "The trap is set." I looked at Chad's arrogant back, and for the first time since the funeral, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf watching a sheep walk into a ravine. "Enjoy the milk, Chad," I thought. "It is the last thing you will ever taste in this house." I stood up and walked to the kitchen window. A large truck was pulling up to the curb. The side of the truck read "Junk Removal." Brittany wasn't selling my furniture. She was throwing it away. She was erasing us. The war had officially begun. I lay on that lumpy sofa in the dark, listening to the sounds of my life being dismantled. It was past 2 in the morning, but the house was alive with the noise of greed. Above me, in the room that had been David's sanctuary, his home office, I heard the distinct sound of drawers being ripped out and dumped onto the floor. It sounded like a wild animal was tearing through the room. That office was sacred. It was where David had studied for his finals, where he had built his first business plan, where he had framed his first dollar. Now Brittany and that man Chad were desecrating it. I heard the screech of packing tape being ripped, followed by the heavy thud of books hitting the hardwood. Then came a sound that made my stomach turn, the ripping of paper. Thick, heavy paper being torn with violence. Those were likely the insurance policies, the old deeds, the papers they thought would lead them to the money. They were frantic, desperate to find the wall safe David had mentioned once years ago. Suddenly a crash echoed through the floorboards, the sound of glass shattering against the wall. I flinched, as if I had been hit myself. That wasn't just glass. I knew exactly what was on that shelf. It was the photo of David at 7 years old, holding his first baseball trophy, grinning with that gap-toothed smile that used to light up my entire world. They were smashing his memory. They were erasing him from his own home. I heard Chad cursing, his voice muffled but angry. "Where is it?" he growled. "He said it was behind the bookshelf." Brittany's voice was shrill, bordering on hysteria. "Keep looking," she snapped. It has to be here. The old hag probably moved it. Tear the drywall down if you have to. I squeezed my eyes shut, hot tears leaking out and soaking into the dusty cushion. They were tearing my heart out piece by piece, searching for gold in a graveyard. They thought they were the predators hunting for treasure. They didn't realize they were just grave robbers disturbing a peace they would never understand. I lay there silent and still, letting them destroy the room, knowing that every scratched floorboard and broken frame was just adding another line to the bill they would eventually have to pay. But they found nothing because my son was smarter than they ever gave him credit for. The sun rose on a scene of absolute devastation. I hadn't slept, my body aching from the sofa, but the noise outside drew me to the window. A massive white truck was idling at the curb, its engine rumbling like a beast waiting to be fed. Men in blue coveralls were marching in and out of my front door, carrying my life in their hands. But they weren't moving us out. They were throwing us away. I watched in horror as two men hauled out the dining room table. It was solid mahogany, hand-carved in the 1920s, a wedding gift to my parents. It had survived the Great Depression, it had hosted Christmas dinners for 4 generations, it had borne the weight of caskets and cradles. And now Brittany was standing on the sidewalk, pointing a manicured finger toward the dumpster she had rented. "Trash!" she yelled. "Put it in the trash! It is all termite food!" I couldn't stay silent. I moved as fast as my stiff legs would carry me, bursting out the front door. "Stop!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "That is not trash. That is my family history." Brittany turned to me, sipping an iced coffee, looking bored. "It is ugly, Esther," she said flatly. "It is dark and heavy, and it smells like old people." I ordered a white sectional and glass tables. "We are updating. Get this junk out of my sight." The movers hesitated, looking between the grieving mother and the woman writing the checks. Just then, Chad came out carrying the wingback chair. It was my husband's chair. The leather was worn smooth where his hands had rested for 30 years. It still smelled like his pipe tobacco. It was the only place I could sit and still feel his arms around me. "No," I wailed, lunging forward. "Not the chair. Please, not the chair." I grabbed the armrest, my fingers digging into the leather, trying to pull it back from Chad's grip. He laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Let go, you crazy old bat," he sneered. I held on with everything I had. My feet sliding on the pavement, suddenly Chad shoved the chair forward hard. The heavy wood frame hit me in the chest, knocking the wind out of me. I stumbled back my heel, catching on the uneven concrete, and I went down hard. My head cracked against the brick of the planter box. Stars exploded in my vision. I lay there on the cold ground, gasping for air, a warm trickle of blood running down my temple. Chad didn't even look down. He tossed the chair into the dumpster where it landed with a sickening crunch of splintering wood. Brittany looked at me with mild annoyance, stepped over my legs, and told the movers to hurry up because the new furniture was arriving at noon. By the afternoon, my head was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic pain that matched the beating of my heart. I had managed to crawl back inside and clean the cut on my forehead, but the stress was taking its toll. My chest felt tight, that familiar squeezing sensation that meant my blood pressure was spiking. I needed my medication. I needed my injection. Usually Nurse Sarah came at 2:00. She was a kind woman, one of the few people who treated me like a human being. I sat on the edge of the sofa, watching the clock, waiting for the sound of her knock. At 2:15, the doorbell finally rang. I started to get up, but Brittany was already at the door. I heard Sarah's cheerful voice. "Good afternoon. I am here for Mrs. Williams's heart medication." Brittany didn't open the door wide. She blocked the entrance with her body. "We don't need you anymore," Brittany said, her voice ice cold. You are fired. Sarah sounded confused. But Mum, Mrs. Williams has a condition. She needs this injection daily or she risks heart failure. The bill is paid through the month. Brittany laughed. Not by me it isn't. And since I control the finances, now your services are terminated. Effective immediately, goodbye. She slammed the door in Sarah's face. I heard Sarah knocking, calling out my name, but Brittany turned the deadbolt. She turned around and saw me standing in the hallway, clutching my chest. She walked past me into the kitchen where my weekly pill organizer sat on the counter. It was filled with the beta blockers and blood thinners that kept me alive. Without breaking stride, Brittany grabbed the plastic container. She walked to the trash can, popped the lid, and dumped the entire week's worth of medicine onto the coffee grounds and eggshells. "What are you doing?" I gasped, the air catching in my throat. "You will kill me." Brittany wiped her hands as if she had touched something dirty. "Stop being dramatic, Esther," she said. "You are just looking for attention. This house is under new management, and we are cutting costs. I am not paying for expensive nurses and fancy pills for a woman who does nothing but take up space. We do not feed parasites here. If you want to live, stop being useless." Panic set in as the sun began to set. My chest was a tight band of iron, and my breath was coming in short, shallow gasps. I knew I couldn't last the night without my medication. I had to get to the pharmacy. I had a secret stash of cash in my shoe, enough for a refill. I waited until I heard the television blaring in the living room, masking the sound of my movements. I crept to the front door, my shoes in my hand, moving like a ghost in my own home. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling. I gripped the cold metal and turned. It didn't budge. I tried again, twisting harder. Locked. I looked at the keypad above the handle. It was a smart lock David had installed for security. I punched in the code I had used for 3 years. The light flashed red. Access denied. I tried again, thinking my shaking fingers had made a mistake. Red light. Access denied. I tried the back door. Locked. I tried the windows. Painted shut or locked from the keyholes. I went back to the front door and stared at the keypad. The code had been changed. Brittany wasn't just cutting costs. She was cutting off my escape. I wasn't a guest anymore. I wasn't even a nuisance. I was a prisoner. I slid down the door to the floor, the cold wood seeping into my bones, realizing that the woman upstairs, Pauls, wasn't just waiting for me to die. She was accelerating the process. The front door rattled under my hand, and for a moment I thought the locks had been changed again. I was 19 years old, returning to the only home I had ever known, but I felt like a trespasser. Finally, the heavy oak door swung open, but it wasn't a welcome sight. My mother, Brittany, stood there blocking the entrance, holding a glass of white wine at 10 in the morning. She looked me up and down with a sneer that curdled my stomach. She didn't see her daughter. She saw an inconvenience. She saw someone who looked too much like the side of the family she despised. "You are late," she snapped, taking a sip of wine. "I told you to be here an hour ago." I tried to step inside, clutching my backpack, but she didn't move. "I need my textbooks, Mum," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Finals are next week, and I need to pay the tuition balance or they will drop my classes." Brittany laughed a harsh, dry sound. "Tuition? You think I have money for your little accounting degree?" She leaned against the doorframe, her eyes narrowing. "You are just like your grandmother. Dark, ungrateful, and always with your hand out. You think because your father spoiled you that you are entitled to his money, that money is mine now. It is compensation for putting up with this family for 20 years. She reached into the pocket of her silk robe and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a legal document. I recognized the header immediately. It was a waiver of inheritance rights. If you want your tuition paid, Zoe, you sign this. Right now. It says you forfeit any claim to the estate, the house, the life insurance, everything. You sign it, and I will write a check for your little semester. You don't sign it, and you can go be a cashier. I stared at her, horrified. She was leveraging my education against my birthright. She knew that forensic accounting was my dream, my way of making sense of a chaotic world. I looked at the pen she held out. My hand shook as I took it. I felt dirty, like I was selling my soul to the devil just to survive. I signed my name on the line, the ink looking like a scar on the white paper. Brittany snatched it back, blowing on the ink with a satisfied smirk. "Good girl," she said. "Now go get your books and get out. Do not talk to the old woman. She is losing her mind, and I don't want you upsetting her." She stepped aside, and I walked into the house that felt colder than it ever had before. I waited until I heard the clinking of bottles in the kitchen, the signal that Brittany and Chad were distracted. I slipped off my shoes and crept toward the living room. The air was stale, the heating turned off to save money. I found Grandma Esther on the sofa, huddled under a thin throw blanket. She looked so small. Her skin was grey and clammy, and her breathing was shallow. She was clutching her chest, her eyes squeezed shut in pain. "Grandma," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside her. I pulled a bottle of water and a small pill case from my pocket. I had used my lunch money to buy her heart medication from the pharmacy near campus. "Here, take this." Her eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain. But when she saw me, a spark of recognition returned. She swallowed the pill dry, her hand trembling in mine. I helped her drink the water, watching the color slowly return to her cheeks. Why, Grandma asked, her voice a rasp. Why is she doing this? It wasn't just hate, Grandma. It was debt. I pulled out my phone. I had to show her. I had to break her heart to save her life. Before Dad died, he came to see me at the dorms. He gave me his old phone. He said he was afraid. I unlocked the screen and opened the messaging app. I scrolled to the conversation between Dad and Brittany from 2 days before his heart attack. "Look at this." I held the screen up so she could focus. The texts were a stream of panic. "Brittany, where did the 50,000 go?" Dad had written. "And then the bookie called me at work. They said they are coming to the house." And finally, the last message he ever sent. "I cannot work any more overtime. My chest hurts. I am exhausted. Please stop gambling." I watched Grandma read the words. I watched the realization hit her like a physical blow. Dad didn't just die of natural causes. He was worked to death. He was taking double shifts, extra consulting gigs, anything to cover the black hole of Brittany's online gambling addiction. She owed $500,000 to people who didn't use lawyers to collect. That was why she needed the house sold. That was why she needed the insurance money immediately. She wasn't grieving. She was running for her life, and she had sacrificed Dad to do it. Grandma closed her eyes, a single tear tracking through the dust on her cheek. She didn't sob. She didn't wail. She went very, very still. It was the silence of a storm gathering strength. Suddenly, Grandma Esther sat up. The blanket fell away from her shoulders. She took a deep breath, and when she opened her eyes, the cloudy look of pain was gone, replaced by something sharp, dangerous, and terrifyingly clear. It was the look of the head nurse who used to run the emergency ward. The look of a woman who had stared down death and won. "Stop crying, Zoe," she commanded, her voice firm and steady for the first time in days. "We are done being victims. We are done mourning. Now we hunt." She grabbed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You are studying forensic accounting, yes. You know how to track things. You know how to find what people hide." "Yes, Grandma." I stammered, wiping my eyes. Good. She pointed toward the stairs. Your mother thinks she is smart. She thinks she has won because she has the keys and the cruelty. But she is sloppy. Criminals are always sloppy. I want you to go upstairs to her office. Use that computer knowledge of yours. I want you to install a keylogger on her laptop. I want to see every keystroke, every password, every message she sends to that man, Chad. Can you do that? I nodded, a fire lighting in my own chest. I could do that. I could do more than that. Go, she whispered. And Zoe, do not let her catch you. If she does, we lose everything. I moved like a shadow. The stairs didn't creak under my feet. I had learned to walk silently in this house years ago to avoid Brittany's temper. The door to the home office was open a crack. I could hear Brittany and Chad in the master bedroom down the hall, laughing about the wine they were drinking. I slipped inside and woke the computer. It was still logged in, careless, just like Grandma said. My fingers flew across the keyboard. It took me less than 3 minutes to install the monitoring software and set it to run in the background, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Just as I was about to close the window, an email notification popped up in the corner of the screen. The subject line made my blood freeze. Urgent sale. Price reduction. I clicked it. It was an email from Brittany to a real estate broker I didn't recognize. The text was short and brutal. I will take 50% of the market value if you can bring cash in 72 hours. No inspections, no questions. I need the money by Friday or the deal is off. Sell it as a teardown if you have to. Just get me the cash. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. She wasn't just selling the house, she was giving it away. She was liquidating a $3 million brownstone for pennies just to pay off her debts and run away with Chad. We didn't have weeks, we didn't even have days. We had 72 hours before she burned our entire legacy to the ground. I pulled my phone out and took a picture of the screen. Game on, mother. I knew what I had to do. It was the hardest role I had ever played. Harder than smiling at racists in the 60s. Harder than pretending I wasn't tired after a 12-hour shift. I had to become what they wanted me to be. I had to become the crazy, incontinent old woman who couldn't be trusted with a spoon, let alone $1 million estate. I waited until Chad was settled on the sofa, watching a football game on David's 60-inch television. His feet propped up on the coffee table like he owned the place. He was drinking a beer, shouting at the screen, completely ignoring me sitting in the corner. I stood up slowly, my body trembling not from age, but from the sheer force of will it took to degrade myself like this. I walked into the center of the room, right in front of the television. Chad groaned, leaning to look around me. "Move it, Granny, you are blocking the play." I didn't move. I stared blankly at the wall, letting my jaw go slack, letting my eyes unfocus. I muttered nonsense words under my breath, calling out for people who had been dead for 20 years. "Mama," I whispered. "Mama, the chickens are out." Chad laughed, taking a swig of beer. "You are losing it, old lady. Go back to your corner." That is when I did it. I let go. I urinated right there on the expensive Persian rug. The same rug Brittany had claimed was worth more than my life. The warm liquid pooled around my feet, soaking into the wool. I didn't flinch. I just kept staring at the wall, humming a broken tune. Chad jumped up so fast he knocked his beer over. "What the hell?" he screamed, his face twisting in disgust. "Are you kidding me, you nasty old animal?" He lunged at me, his hand drawing back. I didn't flinch. I didn't protect myself. I let him do it. He kicked me hard in the shin. The pain was sharp and immediate, radiating up my leg, but I didn't cry out. I just swayed, looking at him with empty, confused eyes. "Look what you did," he yelled, pointing at the stain. You are cleaning that up with your tongue. Brittany came running down the stairs, phone in hand, drawn by the noise. Oh my God, she shrieked, looking at the rug, then at me. But she wasn't angry. She was smiling, a cruel, victorious smile. Do not touch her, Chad, she said, holding up her phone. This is perfect. She started recording. Look at her. She narrated for the camera, her voice dripping with fake concern. My poor mother-in-law. She has completely lost control of her faculties. She is urinating in the living room. She doesn't even know where she is. It is unsafe for her to be here. She needs professional help immediately. She circled me like a shark, getting close-ups of the stain of my wet shoes, of my vacant expression. Say something, Esther, she prodded. Do you know who I am? I looked at the camera lens and blinked slowly. The chickens? I mumbled again. Brittany laughed, cutting the recording. That is it, she said to Chad, her eyes gleaming. That is the money shot. I am sending this to the lawyer right now. This proves she is incompetent. The judge will grant me emergency guardianship by tomorrow morning. She typed furiously on her phone, hitting send with a flourish. We are going to strip her of every right she has. She won't be able to sign a check vote or even choose her own breakfast. She is officially property now. That night the temperature dropped. It was a bitter November chill that seeped through the brick walls. I was banished to the basement, the finished guest room down there, having been stripped of its bed and heater earlier that day. Brittany had cut the central heating to the lower level. To save money, she had said. But I knew it was to freeze me out, to weaken me until pneumonia did what she couldn't. I huddled in the corner on a pile of old blankets, shivering so hard my teeth chattered. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making every breath a struggle. I was hungry too. They hadn't fed me since breakfast. Suddenly, a soft tapping sound came from the high ventilation window near the ceiling. I looked up. The small latch turned and the window pushed inward. A thin rope dropped down, dangling in the darkness. Tied to the end was a plastic grocery bag. I crawled over to it, my stiff joints protesting. Inside was a thermos of hot soup, a loaf of bread, and a thick wool blanket. I looked up at the window and saw a flash of a face. Zoe, she couldn't come down. Brittany had locked the basement door from the outside, but she had found a way. I drank the soup greedily, the warmth spreading through my body, giving me strength. She hadn't forgotten me. I wasn't alone. The next morning, the silence was broken by the shrill ring of the landline phone upstairs. It rang and rang. Finally, I heard Brittany's footsteps. She picked it up, and because she wanted me to hear, she put it on speakerphone. I crept up the basement stairs and pressed my ear against the cold wood of the door. Hello? A deep, authoritative voice boomed. This is Mr. Henderson. I am calling to speak with Esther. I have urgent legal documents regarding the estate that require her signature. Brittany laughed, a sound that chilled me more than the basement air. Oh, Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice dripping with false sorrow. I am afraid that is impossible. Esther has taken a turn for the worse. She has slipped into a coma. The doctor says it is only a matter of hours now. You don't need her signature. You need to start preparing the cremation paperwork. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. She wasn't just waiting for me to die. She was declaring me dead while I was still breathing. I heard Mr. Henderson pause. A coma, he said slowly. I see. Well, I will prepare the necessary arrangements. Goodbye, Brittany. The line went dead. I slid down the doorframe, my heart hammering against my ribs. She had just signed my death warrant. It didn't take long for the infestation to spread because Chad didn't just visit anymore, he planted his flag. I watched from the shadows of the kitchen as he sauntered down the stairs, wearing my son's navy blue silk robe. It was a Christmas gift I had saved for 6 months to buy, and now it hung open on this stranger's pale, flabby chest. He held a crystal goblet in his hand, filled to the brim with the vintage Bordeaux David had been saving for his 10th anniversary. That wine was meant to celebrate love, and now it was being swilled by the man who helped destroy my family. But the worst indignity wasn't the robe or the wine, it was what he did next. He walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the mantel right next to the small table where I kept the photos of my parents, my grandparents, and David's urn. That was holy ground in this house because we honored our ancestors here. Chad kicked off his slippers and propped his bare feet right next to my grandmother's picture. He pulled out his phone, held the wine glass up to the light, and snapped a selfie, living the dream. He said loud enough for me to hear, typing the caption with a smirk. Brownstone life started from the bottom. Now we are here. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned grey, because he was desecrating my history for likes on the internet. He treated my family's legacy like a backdrop for his unearned victory lap. I wanted to scream and tear him away from that mantle, but I remembered the plan. I remembered that pride comes before the fall. So I stayed silent, watching the usurper get comfortable on a throne that was about to become his electric chair. Let him post his pictures and let him leave a digital trail of his trespass, because every photo was just more evidence for the jury of public opinion that I was about to convene. That evening, the house fell into a heavy, intoxicated silence as Brittany and Chad had gone out to celebrate their new life, leaving me and Zoe alone in the wreckage. Zoe crept down to the basement, where I was still exiled, clutching her laptop like a shield. Her face was pale, illuminated by the blue light of the screen. "Grandma, you need to see this," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. She sat on the cold concrete floor beside my cot and angled the screen toward me. The keylogger software she had installed was working perfectly, and it had captured everything Brittany had typed, every site she had visited. There, glowing on the screen, was a confirmation email from a luxury wedding planner in Tuscany. I squinted at the details. A villa rental, a 5-course reception, and a custom gown costing $12,000. The total deposit was $50,000 paid yesterday. The source of funds was listed clearly: Chase bank account, ending in 459. That was David's life insurance payout. The money that was supposed to pay off the mortgage, the money that was supposed to finish Zoe's education, was gone. But then I looked at the date. The reservation was for September 15th. I did the math in my head, and the bile rose in my throat, because that date was exactly 3 months and 1 day after David's death. They weren't just spending the money, they were dancing on his grave. They had been planning this while he was in the hospital. While my son was fighting for every breath, his wife was picking out flower arrangements for her wedding to another man. Zoe pointed to another window on the screen. "Look at the guest list, Grandma." I scanned the names. It was a list of Brittany's gambling buddies and fair weather friends. And then I saw it. Or rather, I didn't see it. Zoe's name wasn't there, and neither was mine. They were going to leave us here, destitute and homeless, while they drank champagne in Italy. Zoe started to cry, silent, shaking sobs. "She erased me, Grandma. She literally erased me." I pulled my granddaughter into my arms, wrapping the thin wool blanket around us both. "She didn't erase you, baby," I promised, smoothing her hair. "She just drew a target on her own back. She thinks that money is hers, and she thinks she is going to Italy, but the only place she is going is down." The next afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, and a man stepped out, looking like a shark in a cheap suit. I recognized him immediately as Marcus Thorne, a real estate broker known in the neighborhood for bullying elderly folks out of their deeds, so developers could bulldoze our history and put up glass condos. He didn't knock. He walked right in like he had a key. Brittany met him in the foyer, looking nervous but greedy. I watched from the cracked door of the basement. Thorne didn't offer condolences, and he didn't look at the architecture or the crown moulding. He just set a heavy leather briefcase on the console table. "We have a deal," he said, his voice low. "The developers are ready to move, and they want the structure gone by the 1st of the month." Gone. He was talking about demolishing 100 years of history. Brittany didn't flinch. She just stared at the briefcase. "And the price?" she asked. Thorne popped the latches. Inside, stacks of $100 bills were packed tight. "50,000 cash right now just for you," he said. "Under the table, no taxes, no paper trail. The rest of the sale price goes through the bank, but we are dropping the listing to $1.5 million for a quick close." That house was worth $3 million easy, but she was selling my legacy for half price just to get a quick payout. She reached out and ran her hand over the money, her eyes glazing over with lust. It was disgusting because she was selling my blood, sweat, and tears for a stack of paper. "Done," she whispered. "When do we sign?" "Tomorrow night," Thorne said. "Get the old lady ready. We need her mark on the power of attorney, and then this place is dust." The house was quiet again, but the air felt heavy, charged with the electricity of the coming storm. Zoe came down the stairs, checking over her shoulder to make sure the coast was clear. She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out a cheap, prepaid flip phone. We had bought it with cash days ago for this exact moment. It buzzed in her hand. "It is Mr. Henderson," she whispered, her eyes wide. I took the phone, my heart hammering a steady rhythm of war drums against my ribs. I opened the text message. It was short and it was simple, but it was the most beautiful thing I had ever read. "The fish has bitten. Let her sign the contract tomorrow. It is a death sentence." I closed the phone and looked at Zoe. The fear was gone from her face, replaced by a steely determination that mirrored my own. "Go upstairs," I told her. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow we wear our best clothes because tomorrow we bury them." The so-called memorial service for my son began at 7 o'clock, but it didn't look like any homegoing I had ever seen in my 68 years of life. Brittany had transformed the ground floor of my historic brownstone into something that looked like a nightclub lounge. The warm, inviting lighting was gone, replaced by harsh, modern track lights that made everyone look pale and sharp. There was no gospel music, no hymns to comfort the grieving soul, only a thumping, soulless electronic beat that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled the urns on the mantel. But the worst part wasn't the decor. It was the people. I stood at the top of the stairs, hidden in the shadows, looking down at the sea of strangers filling my home. There wasn't a single person from the neighborhood, not one member of the usher board, not one deacon, not Mrs. Johnson from next door, who had baked David cookies since he was 5. The room was filled with white men in expensive, ill-fitting suits, and women with too much jewelry and not enough fabric. I recognized the type immediately. These were investors, developers, and sharks from the real estate world, mixed in with the loud, frantic energy of Brittany's gambling circle. They weren't here to mourn David. They were here to pick his bones. They held flutes of champagne, laughing with their heads thrown back, exchanging business cards over plates of raw oysters and caviar. It was grotesque. It was a flea market disguised as a funeral. Brittany was flitting between groups like a butterfly in a red dress, laughing, touching arms, pointing out the architectural details of the house, as if she were giving a guided tour of a museum she had already conquered. I saw Marcus Thorne, the broker who had bribed her, standing near the fireplace, looking at his watch, eager to get the paperwork signed so the bulldozers could come. This wasn't a memorial. It was an auction, and my family's history was the lot on the block. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive perfume and greed, and prepared to play my part in this farce. I had to descend into the pit of vipers, not as the matriarch, but as the victim they desperately wanted me to be. Brittany had laid out my costume on the bed earlier that evening. It wasn't my Sunday best, nor was it the dignified black suit I had worn to the funeral. It was an old moth-eaten gardening dress I hadn't worn in a decade, stained with soil and bleach. She had paired it with mismatched socks and slippers that were falling apart. "Put this on," she had sneered. "You need to look the part. If you look too put together, people might ask questions." So I put it on. I let her mess up my hair until I looked like a frightened bird. I let her take my glasses so I would have to squint and stumble. Now she marched me into the living room, her grip on my arm tight enough to bruise. "Look who decided to join us," she announced, her voice pitching up into that fake syrupy tone she used for an audience. "It is poor, dear Esther." The conversation died. 100 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. I hunched my shoulders, making myself smaller, trembling as I walked. I saw the looks on their faces: disgust, pity, dismissal. They didn't see the woman who had saved lives in the ER. They saw a liability. Brittany led me to a wooden stool in the corner, away from the food and the guests, as if I were a piece of furniture that needed to be hidden but acknowledged. "Just sit here, Esther, and try not to make a mess," she whispered, pinching my arm. I sat gripping the edge of the stool, watching them resume their drinking. They talked about me as if I wasn't there. "It is so sad," one woman said, sipping her wine. "Dementia hits so fast. Brittany is a saint for dealing with this." Suddenly Chad appeared, weaving through the crowd, a bottle of red wine in his hand. He was drunk. His face flushed, his eyes mean. He stumbled toward me, a wicked grin spreading across his face. "Hey, Granny," he slurred. "You look thirsty." Before I could move, he tipped the bottle. Dark red wine cascaded over my head, soaking my grey hair, dripping down my face, ruining the dress. The cold liquid shocked me, running down my neck like blood. The room went silent, then erupted in laughter. Chad feigned surprise. "Oops," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "My bad." Hand slipped. I sat there, wine dripping from my nose. Humiliation burning in my gut, hotter than any fire. I didn't wipe it off. I let it stain me. I let them laugh, because every drop of wine, every cruel chuckle was fuel for what was coming next. I locked eyes with Zoe across the room. She was by the projector, tears streaming down her face, but she gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. We were ready. The clock struck 9, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from party to business. The music was lowered, and a hush fell over the crowd as a short, balding man with a briefcase stepped forward. This was the notary, a man whose paid-for seal was about to legitimize the theft of my life's work. Brittany clapped her hands, beaming. "Okay, everyone," she chirped. "We have a little bit of housekeeping to take care of before we continue celebrating David's life. As you know, Esther is no longer capable of managing her affairs. To ensure her care and safety, she is signing over full power of attorney and the deed to the house to me tonight. This way we can get her settled in a wonderful facility by tomorrow." There was a polite round of applause. The notary placed a thick document on the coffee table in front of me. It was open to the signature page. The words "full power of attorney and transfer of deed" were visible in bold letters at the top. Marcus Thorne stepped closer, his eyes hungry. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. Brittany walked over to me, a gold pen in her hand. She uncapped it and shoved it into my wine-stained fingers. "Sign it." "Esther," she hissed in my ear, her voice low and venomous. "Sign it right now. Or so help me. I will put you out on the street tonight, and you will freeze to death in the gutter. Do not test me." I looked at the paper. I looked at the line where my name was supposed to go. This signature would erase 40 years of struggle. It would hand my son's legacy to the woman who killed him. The room was dead silent. Everyone was watching the crazy old woman waiting for her to surrender. I gripped the pen. I let my hand shake violently, the tip of the pen hovering over the paper, tapping rhythmically against the line. Tap, tap, tap. I squeezed my eyes shut, letting out a whimper that made Brittany smile. She thought I was breaking. She thought she had won. She leaned in closer, her hand on my back, pushing me down. "Just do it," she whispered. "It is over." I opened my eyes. I looked at the pen in my hand. It was a cheap plastic thing painted to look like gold. Just like her. Just like this whole evening. I stopped shaking. My hand went rock steady. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of my own home. I gripped the pen with both hands, my thumbs pressing into the center of the barrel. And then, with every ounce of strength in my body, I snapped it. The sound was a loud, sharp crack that echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. Ink splattered across the contract, a black Rorschach test on their legal theft. I dropped the broken pieces onto the paper and looked up straight into Brittany's horrified eyes. I stood up from that wooden stool, and I did not use my cane. I did not use the arm of the chair for leverage. I rose with the fluid, powerful grace of a woman who had spent 40 years on her feet saving lives. The tremors in my hands vanished instantly, replaced by a grip of iron. The room gasped a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the space. They were watching a miracle, or perhaps a resurrection. I looked at Brittany, whose eyes were wide with a sudden dawning terror. She looked at the broken pen on the table, then up at my face, and realized she had made a fatal miscalculation. I reached out and scooped up the jagged pieces of the gold-painted plastic. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed them directly into her face. They bounced off her forehead with a satisfying clatter. Before she could react, I snatched the microphone from her hand. She was too stunned to resist. I stepped to the center of the room, the wine still dripping from my hair onto my ruined dress, but I felt like I was wearing royal robes. I looked out at the sea of greedy faces, the developers, the fake friends, the people waiting to pick my son's bones. My voice boomed through the speakers, clear, strong, and vibrating with a rage that had been simmering for weeks. "Thank you, daughter-in-law, for gathering us all here," I said, my eyes locking onto hers. "You wanted a memorial. You wanted to show everyone the truth about this family. Well, I have a special presentation too." I pointed to the back of the room. "Zoe, start the movie. Let us see exactly what kind of devoted wife you really are." The lights in the room dimmed further as the projector beam cut through the smoky air. The large screen behind me, which had been displaying a looped photo of David, flickered and changed. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd as they realized this was not a montage of happy memories. It was a spreadsheet. Massive glowing columns of numbers filled the wall. It was a bank statement from a joint account I knew David had tried to hide from me, but Zoe had found it. The header read, "Chase Platinum," but the transaction history was a horror story. DraftKings, BetMGM, PokerStars, thousands of dollars draining out every single day. Then the screen shifted to a series of text messages. They were blown up large enough for the people in the back row to read. The sender was listed as Vinny. Loans. The messages were brutal. "You owe us 500,000, Brittany. Pay up or we take the house." Another message read, "Your husband's overtime isn't covering the interest. We are coming for knees next week." I narrated the scene like a prosecutor. "Look at the dates I commanded the room. Look at the amounts." While my son was working 20-hour days, while his heart was failing under the stress his wife was gambling away his life. She didn't need to sell this house for his memory. She needed to sell it to save her own skin from the loan sharks she invited into our lives. The crowd began to shift. The developers looked uncomfortable, loosening their ties. The neighbors whispered behind their hands. Brittany stood frozen near the notary, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She tried to step toward the projector, but she stumbled. "This is fake!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "She hacked my phone. This is illegal." I ignored her. I kept my eyes on the screen as the next slide appeared. It was a foreclosure notice on a property Brittany claimed she owned in Florida. It was dated 3 months ago. She was bankrupt, she was drowning, and she had used my son as a life raft until he sank. "This is the woman who claims she wants to put me in a home for my own safety," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "She doesn't care about my safety. She cares about the $3 million sitting in these walls. She killed my son with her greed, and now she is trying to bury me to cover her tracks." The screen flickered again, transitioning to the final piece of evidence. This was the video file Zoe had recovered from the cloud, the one that would seal Brittany's fate forever. The timestamp in the corner of the video read, October 14th, 11:42 p.m. A hush fell over the room, so heavy it felt like gravity had doubled. Everyone knew that date. Everyone knew that time. That was the exact minute the hospital had called to tell us David was gone. The video showed a hotel room. It was the luxury suite at the Ritz, identifiable by the logo on the bathrobes. Brittany was there lounging on the bed, holding a glass of champagne. Chad was beside her shirtless, counting a stack of cash. They were laughing. They were celebrating. The audio was crisp and clear. "I bet the old hag is crying right now," Chad said, tossing a bundle of bills into the air. Brittany took a sip of champagne and looked directly into the camera she had set up to record their victory. "Let her cry," she said, her face twisted into a mask of pure malice. "It is finally over. The bastard is dead. I thought he would never keel over. Now I can finally spend the insurance money without him nagging me about budgets." She clinked her glass against Chad's. To freedom, she toasted. To being rich. The video ended with them kissing a grotesque display of lust over the virtual body of my son. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. I looked at the faces of the guests. The disgust was palpable. Even the sharks, the real estate brokers who would sell their own mothers of Risson for a commission, looked sick. They turned to look at Brittany, their expressions morphing from curiosity to revulsion. She was standing alone in the center of the room, isolated by her own wickedness. The red dress that had looked so powerful an hour ago now looked like a scarlet letter. I lowered the microphone. I didn't need it anymore. My work was done. I had stripped her bare in front of the very people she tried to impress. I had shown the world the monster beneath the makeup. For a moment, nobody moved. The air was thick with tension, vibrating with the shock of the revelation. Then a sound tore through the room. It was a scream, but it didn't sound human. It sounded like a wild animal caught in a trap, a primal, guttural roar of pure rage and humiliation. Brittany's face contorted, turning a violent shade of purple. The veins in her neck bulged. She kicked off her high heels, sending them flying across the room. She looked at me with eyes that had lost all trace of sanity. "You," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger. "You ruined everything." She lunged. She moved faster than I expected, fueled by the adrenaline of total collapse. She bounded up the 2 steps to the platform where I stood. Her hands curled into claws, reaching for my throat. She wasn't thinking about the money anymore. She wasn't thinking about the house. She wanted blood. She wanted to silence the witness who had just destroyed her life. I stood my ground, bracing myself, watching the demon come for me. Brittany was airborne, a red blur of malice flying toward me, but she never reached her target. Zoe, my quiet, studious granddaughter, who had spent the last 3 days crying in the shadows, stepped out from behind the projector screen. She moved with the precision of a dancer and the cold calculation of an accountant. She didn't shout, she didn't wave her arms. She simply extended her leg, hooking her foot right around Brittany's ankle in mid-stride. Physics took over. Brittany's momentum turned against her. She pitched forward, arms flailing, and hit the hardwood floor face first with a sickening wet thud. The sound of her expensive dental veneers cracking against the parquet echoed through the silent room. She slid a few feet, leaving a smear of makeup on the floor, and came to a stop at the base of the platform, groaning in a heap of red silk and humiliation. Chad roared, a sound of pure drunken aggression. "You little bee!" he screamed, his eyes locking onto Zoe. He charged his fists, balled ready to strike a 19-year-old girl. I started to move to throw myself in front of her, but I wasn't fast enough. But I didn't need to be. From the shadows of the hallway, a wall of floral print and Sunday hats emerged. The Sisters of Mount Zion had arrived. Sister Patterson was in the lead, wielding her heavy wooden cane like a broadsword. She didn't hesitate. She swung the cane in a low arc, cracking Chad right across the shins. He howled, stumbling back, clutching his leg. Before he could recover, Mrs. Higgins, the oldest deaconess in our church, reached into her purse. I thought she was reaching for her Bible. Instead, she pulled out a canister of pepper spray. She marched up to Chad, looking up at him with eyes that had seen 80 years of trouble, and sprayed a thick orange cloud directly into his face. Chad dropped to his knees, clawing at his eyes, wheezing and coughing, reduced from a tough guy to a weeping mess in seconds. The church mothers formed a protective circle around Zoe and me, their canes planted firmly on the ground. A formidable phalanx of grandmothers, daring anyone else to make a move. Sister Patterson looked down at Brittany, who was spitting out blood and broken ceramic. "The Lord is my shepherd," she said calmly. "But this cane is hickory. Stay down, child." The commotion at the door silenced the room instantly. The heavy oak double doors swung open, banging against the walls. Standing there, framed by the porch lights, was Mr. Henderson. He wasn't alone. Flanking him were 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies and the chief of police himself, a man I had treated for a heart attack 10 years ago. Mr. Henderson walked into the room, stepping over the puddle of wine and the broken glass. He carried a leather briefcase, not the cheap kind the notary had, but a battered, serious case that held real power. He walked straight to the coffee table, where the unsigned power of attorney lay amidst the shattered pieces of the gold pen. He picked it up, glanced at it with disdain, and dropped it back onto the table as if it were trash. "You can stop the theatrics," Brittany, Mr. Henderson's voice boomed, filling the cavernous room without the need for a microphone. "That document is worthless. Even if Esther had signed it in blood, it would not transfer a single brick of this house to you." Brittany pushed herself up on her hands, blood dripping from her lip. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, struggling to her knees. "I am his wife. I am his heir. Everything is mine by law. This is marital property." Mr. Henderson, looked down at her over his spectacles, his expression one of profound pity mixed with professional satisfaction. "No, Mrs. Williams, it is not. You seem to be operating under the assumption that David died intestate, or that his previous will is valid. You are mistaken. 3 months ago, when David discovered the first unauthorized withdrawal from his savings account, he came to my office. He didn't just file for a divorce, although those papers were ready to be served the day he died. He did something far more permanent. He transferred the title of this house, his investment portfolios, his life insurance policies, and every liquid asset he possessed into a revocable living trust. He placed the briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. The sound was like a gavel striking. He pulled out a thick, bound document with a blue cover. "This is the Williams Family Trust," he announced, holding it up for the developers and the sharks to see. "The assets within this trust are no longer David's personal property. They belong to the legal entity of the trust. And upon his death, the control of that trust passed immediately to the successor trustee." He turned to me and bowed slightly. "That trustee is Mrs. Esther Williams. She has sole, absolute, and revitalized authority over every dime, every doorframe, and every decision." A gasp went through the room. The investors started backing away toward the door, realizing the deal was dead. But Mr. Henderson wasn't finished. He opened the document to a specific page marked with a red tab. Now, regarding the beneficiaries, he continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. David was very specific. He wanted to ensure that his wife was not forgotten. "There is a specific bequest for you, Brittany." He leaned in closer, making sure she heard every word. "I leave to my estranged wife, Brittany, the sum of $1. This amount is to ensure that she cannot claim she was inadvertently omitted from my estate." Brittany froze, her eyes bulging. $1, she whispered. $1. However, Mr. Henderson said, raising a finger. "There is a condition. A poison pill clause, if you will." David included a stipulation regarding contestability. "If you attempt to challenge the validity of this trust, or if you attempt to claim any spousal share beyond that $1, the trust instructs me to immediately file a criminal complaint against you for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. We have the bank records, Brittany. We have the evidence of you forging his signature on loan applications. We have the proof that you drained his accounts while he was in a coma. If you walk away now, you get your $1 and your freedom. If you sue, you go to federal prison. The choice is yours." Brittany stared at him, her brain trying to process the total collapse of her world. She looked at the document in his hand, then at the developers, retreating out the door, then at Chad, who was still moaning on the floor, blinded and useless. The reality of her situation crashed down on her. She wasn't a rich widow. She was a homeless criminal with $1 to her name. But she didn't break down in tears. She didn't beg for forgiveness. Her narcissism wouldn't allow it. Instead, she exploded. She grabbed the fake power of attorney document from the table and ripped it in half. She tore it into shreds, screaming like a banshee. "This is a lie," she shrieked, throwing the confetti of paper into the air. "This is a forgery. You old witch, you tricked him. I am his wife. I am the legal wife. You cannot kick me out of my own house. I have rights. I have squatters' rights. I am not going anywhere." She scrambled to her feet, blood and saliva flying from her mouth, looking wild and dangerous. "I am the lady of this house," she yelled, pounding her chest, "and you will have to drag me out of here by my hair." I looked at Brittany, who was still screaming about her rights and about being the lady of the house while clutching the banister like a shipwreck survivor holding onto driftwood. It was pathetic. I did not raise my voice because I did not need to. I stepped closer, my shoes crunching on the broken glass of her false authority. "You are mistaken," I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria like a scalpel. "You are not the lady of this house. You are a trespasser. And trespassers get evicted." I checked the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one she had planned to throw in the dumpster. It was 10:17. "You have exactly 10 minutes, Brittany. 10 minutes to go upstairs, pack your personal effects and get off my property. And when I say personal effects, I mean the clothes on your back, And the cheap makeup you bought before you met my son." I saw her eyes dart toward the jewelry box on the side table, but I stepped in front of it, blocking her view. "Do not touch the jewelry David bought you," I warned her, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That belongs to the estate to cover your debts now. Do not touch the designer handbags, because those are assets being seized. And do not even think about looking for the car keys. The Mercedes stays in the garage because you cannot afford the gas, let alone the payments. You can take the bus to whatever hole you crawled out of." She looked at me, her mouth gaping open, realizing I was not bluffing. The sheriff's deputies stepped forward, their hands resting on their belts, silent enforcers of my will. "I suggest you hurry," I added, "because at 10:27 I am locking that door, and if you are still inside, you will be removed in handcuffs for criminal trespassing. Move." While Brittany scrambled up the stairs, sobbing and cursing the man who had helped her destroy my family, decided it was time to cut his losses. Chad, his face still red and swollen from the pepper spray, tried to slink toward the back door. He moved like a rat, sensing a sinking ship, keeping his head down, trying to blend into the shadows of the kitchen. He probably thought that with everyone watching Brittany, he could slip away unnoticed, maybe steal the silverware on his way out. But he forgot about the eyes that had been watching him for weeks. He forgot about Zoe. Just as his hand touched the handle of the patio door, the chief of police stepped into his path, blocking the exit with his broad shoulders. "Going somewhere, son?" the chief asked, his voice deceptively friendly. Chad flinched, wiping his streaming eyes. "I am leaving," he stammered, his arrogance completely gone. "This is a domestic dispute. I am just a guest. I have rights. I am going to my car." The chief shook his head slowly. "I am afraid that is not going to happen. You see, we received a very interesting tip about your vehicle. A silver BMW parked out front, correct?" Chad froze. He looked around the room and saw Zoe standing by the projector holding her phone up. On the screen, a video was playing. It was a grainy, black-and-white clip from the security camera Zoe had installed in the garage days ago without anyone knowing. It showed Chad leaning into the trunk of his car, taping a large, brick-sized package inside the spare tire well. He looked around nervously in the video, then hid a smaller bag of white powder in the glove compartment. Zoe had zoomed in on the timestamp. It was yesterday afternoon. "That looks like a significant amount of controlled substance," the chief noted, watching the video over Zoe's shoulder. "Intent to distribute, I would say. We already have a K9 unit out by your car and the dog is going crazy." Chad's knees gave out. He slumped against the refrigerator, realizing his arrogance had been his undoing. He had parked right in the driveway, thinking he was untouchable. "Officer, cuff him," the chief ordered. Chad started to cry, a high-pitched whining sound as the metal cuffs clicked onto his wrists. He looked at Brittany, who was dragging a suitcase down the stairs, and screamed. "She made me do it. She told me to hold it." But nobody was listening to the rat anymore. Brittany reached the bottom of the stairs, dragging a suitcase that was only half full, because the deputies had watched her pack to make sure she did not steal the silver. She looked around the room. Chad was in handcuffs. The investors were gone. The police were waiting. She realized she had no allies left. No husband, no boyfriend, no money. Panic, raw and ugly, finally broke through her rage. She looked for a lifeline, and her eyes landed on Zoe. My granddaughter was standing by the fireplace, her face calm, her posture straight. Brittany dropped the suitcase. She ran across the room and threw herself at Zoe's feet, wrapping her arms around Zoe's legs. "Zoe, baby, please," she wailed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her mascara. "You cannot let them do this to me. I am your mother. I gave birth to you. I carried you for 9 months. You cannot let that woman throw me out on the street. I will die out there. Tell them to stop. Tell them to let me stay." just for a few days. Please, baby, I love you. I did this for us. Zoe did not flinch. She did not pull away. She just looked down at the woman sobbing on the floor with an expression of absolute detachment. Slowly, Zoe reached into the pocket of her hoodie. She pulled out a piece of paper. It was wrinkled and stained the same paper Brittany had forced her to sign days ago to get her tuition money. The waiver of inheritance. But Zoe flipped it over. On the back was a printout of a student loan application. A loan for $50,000 taken out in Zoe's name, signed with a forgery of Zoe's signature. The date was 3 years ago. Zoe held it in front of Brittany's face. "You did not do this for us, Mum," Zoe said, her voice quiet but lethal. "You sold me out years ago. You stole my credit before I even graduated high school. You did not act like a mother when you stole my future to pay your bookie, so do not ask me to act like a daughter now. Get off me." Brittany recoiled as if she had been slapped. She looked at the paper, then up at Zoe's cold eyes, and saw that the bridge was not just burned, it was nuked. The last shred of her dignity evaporated. She screamed a primal sound of hate and tried to claw at Zoe's face. That was the final straw. The deputies stepped in, grabbing her by the arms. She kicked and thrashed, spitting curses that would make a sailor blush. "Get your hands off me. I own this town. I will sue you all." They dragged her toward the door, her heels leaving scuff marks on the floor she had wanted to replace. As they hauled her onto the front porch, the crowd of guests who had been ushered out earlier were still there, waiting on the sidewalk. 100 smartphones went up in unison, flashes popped like paparazzi. They were live-streaming the downfall of the woman who thought she was untouchable. I stood in the doorway watching the police car lights reflect in her wild eyes. "Goodbye, Brittany," I whispered. "The show is over." The last police cruiser faded around the corner. The red and blue lights finally disappearing from my living room walls, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and holy. The guests had dispersed, whispering and shaking their heads, their phones full of the scandal that would feed the neighborhood gossip mill for years. But Zoe and I did not rest. We stood in the center of the wreckage, looking at the white leather sofa. Brittany had bought the glass tables, the modern art that looked like spilled paint. It all smelled like her. It smelled like cheap perfume and betrayal. I looked at Zoe, who was rubbing her tired eyes, and I pointed to the door. "We are not sleeping until every trace of that woman is gone," I said. "Tonight we cleanse this house." We started with the master bedroom. We stripped the silk sheets she had bought and threw them into a pile in the hallway. We pulled her clothes from the closet, the furs, the designer dresses, bought with David's blood money, and heaped them up. We didn't pack them nicely. We dragged them downstairs. We hauled the white sofa out the front door, scraping the legs against the frame, and dumped it right in the middle of the front lawn. We made a mountain of her possessions under the moonlight. The neighbors, who were still watching from their porches, didn't call the authorities. Mrs. Johnson actually came over with a bottle of lighter fluid. We didn't burn the house down, but we had a bonfire that purged the bad spirits from our land. I watched the smoke rise, carrying away the stench of the last 6 months. We spent the rest of the night scrubbing. We bleached the floors. We opened every window to let the cold, clean air chase out the rot. By dawn, the house was empty of furniture, echoing and bare. But for the first time since David died, it felt like mine again. When the sun was fully up, casting long rectangles of light across the bare hardwood floors, I called Zoe to the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her hoodie stained with soot, but her eyes were clear. "Come with me," I said. I led her to the basement door. She hesitated. That was where I had been imprisoned, where I had frozen. But I opened the door and turned on the light. We walked down the stairs. I walked past the cot where I had slept, past the bucket I had been forced to use. I walked straight to the back wall behind the old furnace that Brittany had been too lazy to inspect. I knelt down my knees, cracking, and counted 3 bricks up from the floor. I pressed the mortar on the left side. A loose brick slid forward. Brittany tore this house apart, looking for a wall safe behind a painting I told Zoe, pulling the brick free. She tore up the floorboards in the office. She broke the drywall. But she never understood this house. She didn't know that your great-grandfather built this foundation with his own hands during the Depression. He built secrets into the stone that only a Williams would know. I reached into the dark cavity and pulled out a metal box wrapped in oilcloth. It was heavy. I set it on the concrete floor and opened the lid. Inside, resting on velvet, was the family legacy, the diamond brooch my grandmother wore to church, the heavy gold quiet money necklace from the 20s, the pearls David had bought me with his first paycheck, and stacks of gold coins my husband had collected for 30 years. Brittany had sold the furniture, but she missed the treasure. I picked up the necklace and placed it around Zoe's neck. It was heavy and cool against her skin. "We kept the real value hidden," I whispered, "just like we kept our dignity. This is yours now. You are the matriarch in training. Never let anyone make you feel small again." 3 weeks later, I sat in the office of the Harlem Cultural Heritage Society. The director, a dignified woman with silver dreadlocks, slid a check across the mahogany desk. It was for $3.2 million. I looked at the number. It was more than double what Brittany was going to sell it for in her back alley deal. I picked up the pen, a real gold pen this time, and signed the deed. I wasn't selling out. I was ensuring that the brownstone would stand for another 100 years, preserved as a museum of Black history, safe from the developers and the wrecking balls. My family's story would be told to generations of children, while Brittany's story would end in a prison cell. With the check in hand, I didn't look back. I bought 2 units in the new high-rise downtown, the one with the 24-hour doorman and the biometric security scanners. 1 unit for me and the penthouse unit right next door for Zoe. No one would ever change our locks again. No one would ever trap us. We moved in on a Tuesday. The furniture was new, elegant, and paid for in cash. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the entire city, a city we had conquered by surviving. I set up my new kitchen, placing David's urn on a shelf that overlooked the skyline, surrounded by fresh flowers, and the peace of a fortress that no one could breach. That evening, the smell of seasoned flour and paprika filled the air of the penthouse. I was frying chicken the real way in a cast-iron skillet. Zoe was making the mac and cheese using the 3-cheese blend I had taught her. We set the table on the balcony, the city lights twinkling below us like fallen stars. We didn't have a big party. We didn't need an audience. It was just the 2 of us, the survivors. I poured 2 glasses of vintage red wine, the kind David used to love. I handed one to Zoe. She took it. Her hand steady, the gold necklace glinting in the candlelight. I raised my glass to the night sky. To David, I said, my voice thick with love and finality, "I kept my promise, son. I protected your daughter. I protected your house. And I took out the trash." Zoe clinked her glass against mine, the sound ringing out, clear and true. "To Dad," she said. "And to Grandma Esther, the woman who doesn't miss." We drank the wine, and it tasted like victory. The nightmare was over. The house was clean, and we were finally truly home. The most profound lesson from this story is that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. Brittany and Chad looked at Esther and saw only an aging widow, a relic to be discarded. They failed to recognize the steel spine of a woman who had navigated decades of hardship to build a legacy. They learned too late that true power does not need to scream, throw tantrums, or bully. It moves quietly, strategically, and with absolute precision. Esther teaches us that protecting what is ours requires more than just emotional attachment. It requires legal preparation and the wisdom to know who is truly in your corner. Furthermore, this journey redefines the meaning of family. It is not determined by marriage certificates or bloodlines, but by loyalty and shared values. While a daughter-in-law sought to erase history for a quick payout, a granddaughter stepped up to preserve her heritage, proving that the future belongs to those who respect the past. In a world that often dismisses the elderly, Esther stands as a reminder that wisdom is a superpower, and justice, when served with patience and intelligence, is the ultimate victory. If you believe that respect must be earned and a family's legacy is worth fighting for, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, would you have kicked them out immediately, or did they deserve every second of that public humiliation?